I really don't, I still don't know what I'm doing with these beyond. It's just a way for me to think out loud, I guess. So, so today I spent some time working on really an introductory idea, which is a really expansive and complicated thing to do when you're working on a theory, right? Because you have a lot of stuff really going on there. You know, you are laying the foundation of all of your general premises. So what connects everything together, and how can you provide that in an analogy that is the most simple? But the problem is a foundational premise isn't that simple, because there's actually a lot of conflicting general premises about how our world works. You know, some of these simple ones I'm talking about people is nature versus nurture. It's a complicated argument that people have been having for a very long time, and you have to have that stuff foundational before you can explain the ways that we engage and interact with each other. And so there's a series of these arguments, and I spent the afternoon kind of working on some of my responses to those in an introduction. And so, I mean, some of what I'm looking at right now, and I'll share some of what I'm looking at, is you're a really fascinating individual, right? It's really complex, but you have these thousands of ways of dealing with problems and complicated situations. You have all these ways that you interact with the world, the ways that you get up for work, the ways that you make breakfast and navigate either getting in a car or a train or walking, how you deal with possible threats, whether that's external, such as there's maybe animals that are dangerous where you live. There might be high crime, how you engage and possibly sort of make it through that. There's awkward dinner cocktails and parties where you have to sneak away. We have all these unique ways that culminate to the answer you, in the same way of a fingerprint, right? There's this complex web of ways that you engage with your world that sum up to who you are. So where do those come from? And how do we develop them? And so I suppose that's where we have to start. And we have to start with understanding this foundation of how we interact before we can move on to the stories that we tell about it. And so I begin with this idea and I run with it to go, I disagree with the idea that we are born entirely blank slates. I think most people do at this point. You know, that's a bit of an older theory. You know, I think, early enlightenments, stuff like that. And that's just not really accurate anymore, or at least holds up. It's so clear now through genetics and evolutionary theory that there are a series of base codes that impact who you are, right? And we can track things genetically. We can track possible genetic disorders that have a major impact on who somebody is. We can track things like, we have all of these things that come from our parents, such as everything as simple as your eye color to how susceptible you are to high blood pressure, to your muscular build, to your body structure, your skeletal structure, how your body responds to different foods and things. All of this stuff creates this base core individual. And I suppose if you want to call that blank, you can. I just don't see it that way. I see it, it is now the core filter for how it'll engage with experiences. And this creates a predisposition to how we engage with the world. So from there, we receive challenges. The external world interacts with us. We get hungry for the first time. We have to urinate. We're scared and trying to get comfort. I mean, as a small child, trying to engage and get these things. And now the external world provides unique challenges for getting that. And where you grow up, which is a really complicated idea, right? I mean, where you grow up is such a series of specific times, eras. You know, how you grew up in 1802 is very different than how you grew up in 7, right? I mean, these are all of these factors. How you grew up in a mountain culture in Colorado is very different than growing up in a prehistoric desert culture. All of these pose unique risks. There's unique predators. There's unique challenges. There's unique resources. There's unique sets of food and available things externally for us to now engage with our base needs. So these base needs now drive us to engage with the world, and what we engage with engages back, right? So now there's an external response, and how it responds back now alters who we are, because that is the definition of learning. That's adaptation. And adaptation is an important point to this theory because adaptation creates the core of the human experience. Humans are extremely capable of adaptation. How many other species live in every climate on our planet, including Antarctica, and have survived the vacuum of space? We're really freaking good at adapting to stuff. You can, and now the more learning that happens, adaptation and learning are a process, the harder it becomes to adapt later, but humans are still really good at it. People immigrate successfully after spending 20 years in a country and are still able to adapt to a new culture. Now, the longer you spend in a previous culture, the harder it tends to be and the more resources it requires to adapt to a new culture. But the second generation adapt like that. So, I mean, we are adaptive. And so that is the natural state of being for humans. So external factor influences us. We adapt and respond to the capacity of our resources. That varies a lot. The resources for a multi-billionaire child in LA in modern day are very different than the resources for survival from a 4th century Chinese girl in a fishing village, right? I mean, there are different resources for survival. Some of those have been more effective than others in terms of just sheer numbers. And that's a different argument for later, right? And I don't mean that any type of culture specific, but just technology changes the ability to survive, right? That's an important part of learning as a system. When your system learned, agriculture, that changed things dramatically. When we learn things like medicine, that changes things dramatically. But back to my original point, individuals adapt to their environment so that they can engage and survive in that environment. And so now this really sets the core of how the individual becomes. And I think this is a very simple, but this is the generic, general, initial argument for how people are different. Because I think that people develop specific tools and strategies to engage with the various challenges unique to their environment. So we got to start there. And I think that this sometimes leads to incorrect assumptions about what intelligence means. There's a lot of arguments about that. Is intelligence ability? I think the best answer is ability to learn, the ability to adapt with new stimulus and information, because that makes somebody the most successful in the largest set of possible environments. Because now their ability to learn and engage and how quickly you're able to interact, but there's still base resources and skills that can increase someone's capacity to do that. An interpreter makes a big difference. So it's not quite that simple. But in general, I say that because I think that sometimes there's this idea that people are stupid from a different system. Somebody shows up and they struggled to survive. People think that they're stupid, but it's because the rules were different in whatever system that they originally came from. If you take a high-class silver spoon executive from New York City and say, all right, you have to live with this rural tribe in the Amazon, he's going to look like a total idiot. He's going to look so dumb to them. They're going to laugh. He's got no idea how to navigate the various vines and challenges, which berries are safe to eat and which ones aren't. He is going to be extremely unsuccessful without significant amounts of education, training, and cost. All because he didn't grow up in that environment. It requires now a new resource to gauge and learn. So I guess premise A is it requires very little resource to learn the system you initially adapted in. and the resources it requires to adapt to a new system scale up. And so from there, I think that the next step has got to start looking at how exactly do we share how to be successful. Because I think that's where my theory really picks up, is how do we educate? And I think we do it through stories. And I think we do it through song. And I think we do it through art. And I think that that is the genre in which we experience how to be successful in systems. Whereas other skills, such as they tell us how to be successful in our culture, at least in mine, that's not a good argument. Because it's not just the arts. We educate in all of the ways. I suppose we understand this in some degree because your bachelor's is usually a Bachelor of Arts in X. So I suppose in some ways you could explain things. Your definition of an art matters here. Is mathematics an art? I think you can make the case that it is. Mathematics are a complex language of patterns. And I've seen some great painters that work with patterns, right? I mean, some of those complex equations are artistic in their own way, as they are, I suppose, my definition of art, and I'll need to make sure I note this, is an ability to communicate the abstract. And so that's important. Abstractions are a really bizarre part of the human experience. Abstractions are things like, what is justice? What is profit? What is success? Fear? Happiness? These are not things with a very clear, ruled definition. These are experiences. These are jurisdictions. These are complex phenomena that are answered in our quest to understand the human experience through these other tools, through engineering, through painting, through comedy. Through all of them, we tell a story. And in that story, we find truth. Tolkien understood this. Tolkien understood that the only way to teach truth was through myth. I mean, that's what Lord of the Rings is about. I suppose they answer different questions. Mathematics answers, what are the rules of this world, this universe? Biology answers, what are the rules of life? Shit, that's complicated. I believe art answers the question, what are the rules to the human soul? And so I think that now becomes the avenue of we need to explore art if we're going to understand human behavior, because we have to understand the soul. So I think that's where we have to go next.